Well, I think from a perspective of being a public servant in the government, driving it at the apex of government, the President's office, in Sri Lanka, for example, what we've tried to do is to sort of get the awareness level up in the private sector and amongst the stakeholders in the country. Because unlike in government where we do know and we are aware of the SDG goals a little bit more in depth than the private sector, the issue is that you need to mainstream the concept and make the private sector understand its value to them, right? So the whole circular economy as a concept is known with the multinationals, but the challenge is to translate that to the local companies. Because what you see in the developed world is essentially you find all of the big companies are part of this. And it's discussed at the board level, and there's a boardroom director who's designated point person who's championing it, and they've hired staff to look at it. And you have the coalitions and the partnerships that you see with all the big brand names globally. But when it comes to Asia and when it comes to developing countries like Sri Lanka, the local companies that are linked to offshore buyers, like say the garment apparel industry, yeah, they're aware of it because their buyers are insisting for them to report on their value chain, right, throughout. Only those companies are aware, but the rest of the companies in the country are indifferent towards it. So the challenge for the government is to now push this concept through and drill it down to through the chambers, through the business chambers, and make sure that the private sector at the local level, not the multinationals, adopt this and champion it internally. So that's the challenge. Well, I think the circular economy in terms of carrying capacity, right? Because they are all either using resources that they're sourcing locally or they're importing resources, and making them understand that the very value and the cost side of those resources, that if they can extend the life of those resources, either through recycling or upcycling or any sort of value chain, at what point of intersections that they will intervene to extend those resources, then that's something that they can see come at the bottom line for their own company. Then, of course, there are low-hanging fruits like dealing with energy conservation and mitigation of that, because that just drops the bottom line because you're reducing costs. That's an easy one to do, right? But some of the other things in designing their products and services for the circularity that you need, now that requires them to rethink concepts, right? Now, when you talk about, whether it is downstream or upstream, say, distribution, right? So when you want to recycle a product or you want to get the product back in, what are the available mechanisms out there for them to do that? Collection, distribution points, and so forth. So I think the government has to step in here and start looking at policies. And we did that in Sri Lanka. I mean, for example, we banned plastics of 22 microns or less is banned so that you have a thicker plastic that can be recycled, right? We banned, for example, the asbestos sheets because it's not a sustainable product to have for domestic homes. So basically roofing companies have to now readjust and look at recycled materials and for their roofing products. So like that, the government can step in and bring in policies, whether it's tariffs or lowering incentives, or whether it is polluter pay principle tariffs, or in some instances, certain other enabling things to force the consumer to do things through bans. That should be taken up by the companies. So what we are trying to do is to get the chambers to be the champions, right? The business chambers and the vertical chambers for the different sectors to be the champions. And I think in time to come, in developing countries, it'll be adopted and people will take up decisions. Well, I mean, very clearly our grandchildren will have a world that will be livable. If you take the degree of heat, photosynthesis at 37 degrees will stop. That means the plants will stop producing oxygen. This is a very simple concept, which, I mean, not talking about sea level rise, we're talking about the very oxygen we breathe. And if we don't do this, we'll be leaving a legacy for our children that they would have desertification where the trees have all died off because the photosynthesis process itself has stopped and there's no oxygen for them to breathe. I mean, are we going to kill our grandchildren, the unborn generations, and leave them a world without food? No. Right. It's our responsibility as this generation to fix the problem that our parents and our grandparents have caused. Not because they were evil, because they were ignorant about the consequences of this GDP, GNP, growth-led economy that they were brought up in. We are lucky that we have been enlightened by this, and I think it's our responsibility, with the knowledge of what we know, what's going to happen with climate change, that we've got to do everything within our power to change it.